Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Eleanor, who I think everyone knows well now. Eleanor's got an impressive media background, which she tells me doing a seminar like this is far more intimidating than standing in front of TV cameras. So hopefully she'll teach us how to not be nervous being in front of media. I landed Eleanor in this, I think, because I thought it'd be great as she's new to the centre, because a lot of us are engaging more with social media and with the mainstream media. I thought it'd be great to hear a little bit about how Eleanor can help us and to give us some guidance on how to go about that.
Well, thank you all for coming along for a seminar which I think will be slightly different to the usual. For a start, I'm not going to talk about corals. I'm not going to talk about fish, reefs, climate change, or in fact I'm not going to touch on the issue of science whatsoever. So today I am going to talk to you about the media, and I hear everyone go, the horrible media. Now, I know many here might have a deep-seated dislike, mistrust of the media, perhaps. Everyone sort of seems to think it's this horrible beast that's tucked away over there. So hopefully today I'll be able to give you a little bit of an understanding to work through that. So hopefully I'll be able to explain a bit about how the media works, what it wants so that you can work well with it, how you work with the media, and how together we can all try to work and use the media to our advantage to promote the centre. So I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about myself to try and establish some media credentials. I have no science credentials whatsoever, but I do know a bit about the media. So to start off with, my background, although I'm a communications manager now, isn't communications. My background is as a journalist. So here we go. This living proof, and you can all have a laugh. That's me. Once upon a time, and you're all allowed to laugh at this, and I'm going to get rid of it in a second. That frame is taken exactly as the banners and the music at the start of the news bulletin ended, and the split second before I opened my mouth and said, "Good evening, this is Eleanor Gregory with ABC News." And I can promise you I was feeling exactly at that moment as I'm feeling right now. Although then I was talking to a potential audience of a couple of 100,000 people, and I just had that adrenaline hit. The rest is smooth sailing.
You didn't have a beer in front of you.
What do you think's under the desk? So anyway, we've seen me, we've laughed. Yes, I was a journalist once upon a time. There's the proof. So I put that up for a little while. Also, while I'm getting started, I just wanted to say that I'm more than happy to take questions at the end of today about things that are of interest to you, but more than that, I'm happy to take questions throughout the seminar. I think the best way to know what it is that you want to know is if you simply ask me. So I'm working off a running sheet of what I can tell you, but this will be most informative for you if you actually find out what you want to know. So that was me. I was a journalist. I studied politics and economics, really not particularly helpful when you're working at a centre promoting science and coral reef studies, but that was me. I then went and did journalism, where I fell in love with broadcast. Until that point, I was going to work for The Australian, God help me, I have no idea why I would have done that. And I was going to be a war correspondent until I grew up a little bit and discovered the idea of being shot didn't appeal to me so greatly, so I became a broadcast news journalist instead. I started out as a commercial TV news reporter, which was a great deal of fun. Never felt particularly serious. We didn't make up our stories, we actually did go and report, and I wrote my own stories. So the two questions I always got in those days, who writes the stories for you, and do you guys just make it up? So, no, we didn't make it up, and yes, I wrote my own stories. After a few years of doing that, I went to the ABC and started in Hobart as a bi-media journalist in those days, which was a radio and TV reporter. Nowadays they are multimedia reporters, but they've just managed to condense the two at that stage. And I worked as a radio and TV news and current affairs reporter, so I did mainly news and a little bit of current affairs. From there I moved to Canberra when they set up their new Canberra newsroom with the ABC there, where I worked for a number of years covering a range of different things, but found myself pushed into the politics area. Well, I kind of chose the politics area and ended up working in the Federal Press Gallery for the ABC at Parliament House. Throughout my career, I've covered pretty much everything from natural disasters to politics to even a little bit of sport. I managed to put together a minute 40's worth of cliches once, which I called a report on an AFL game. If anyone knows, I'm a Canberran and a New South Welsh woman at heart, so rugby isn't my game, and AFL was just a game of 4 quarters, it turned out, not 2 halves, and at the end of the day, sport was the winner. So that was me. I've interviewed people ranging from, as I said, politicians, sporting greats, actors. I once did a story about John Law's golden microphone, and for anyone here from Australia, probably aged over 40, might understand John Law's was a very famous, hideous broadcaster who travelled with his golden microphone. I wasn't allowed to interview him. I was allowed to report on his golden microphone. It was probably the lowest point in my reporting career. I've also been as you've seen, a TV newsreader, a radio newsreader, radio and TV, radio news and programs producer. I've taught journalism at the University of Canberra. I've been a consultant media trainer, which means I get to go and do the fun bits and not the hard graft of actually getting the work. And I've worked as a comms person for a federal government department. I've also been a weather girl, so I'm really good at going, so hope now. And, sort of the Great Australian Bite. Yeah. So now you know a little bit about me and my involvement with the media. It's probably time to get to know a little bit more about the media in general. And the other thing was, up until today, I've never used PowerPoint. So Cindy taught this to me yesterday. If I click in the wrong way direction, just bear with me. So, as I said, I'm getting the impression that scientists at best are somewhat wary of the media, and I think in many cases, they have good reason. But science communication is such an important field, and it's something that you need to be able to get your message out. One of the easiest ways to do it is through the media, so like them or love them or hate them, you will benefit from being able to work with the media. I read recently, and this makes me quite sad, that scientists typically distrust the media. They consider that the media distorts and sensationalises their stories, that the media appears shallow and ignorant, they don't understand science, and are out to get you. I won't tell you what the response from the media side was to that. It was a little rude, so move on. I'm probably not going to be able to debunk those myths, but hopefully maybe you'll get, as I said, a better understanding. So first of all, when we talk about the media, the one myth I do want to dispel is that it is this one big mass, this big beast called the media. The media isn't one big mass, one big beast. I got the right thing? Yeah. There are many different types of media, and their requirements differ, although the two things that all media have in common is that it's deadline driven and that it wants news. Someone said to me recently that I didn't or wouldn't understand deadlines until I'd worked at a university. I beg to differ. If you look at any job ad for a journalist, no matter how junior or how senior they are, it always says needs to be able to work to tight deadlines under pressure. When they're talking about deadlines, they're not talking about weeks, months, or years. We're talking about, if you're lucky in print, day. Essentially, you're talking about hours, minutes, even down to seconds. You'd be amazed at the difference 4 seconds can make between a very normal standard day and a really, really bad day. If you are putting a bulletin to air and your lead story arrives 4 seconds before airtime, it's plain sailing. You're not batting an eyelid. Yes, you might have a few tight muscles around your shoulders sitting like that, but there's no problem. If your lead story arrives 4 seconds after you've gone to air, your day has just gone down the toilet. So when they talk about deadlines, they really mean very, very tight deadlines. And no more is this so evident as in radio news, so I think I'll start there. And the other thing was radio was my first love with broadcast, so that's a good place to start. So typically there are 3 types of radio that you'd encounter: radio news, radio current affairs, and radio programs. And I'm going to deal with news and current affairs together because although they have slightly different deadlines and the stories are of different lengths, essentially they're dealing with the same kinds of issues. Now, the thing about radio is it's immediate. It is the most time critical of any of the traditional media. Journalists in radio news work to the tightest deadlines of all the traditional media. They file to the hour, to the half hour, and then if there's breaking news, they're filing live. So they're filing immediately. You'll notice with radio stories that typically they're fairly short. 40 seconds is, that's a good solid length for a radio news story. And you'll find that they'll often be written, or they're not often, they are always written in present tense, and they're fairly light on detail. So this leads me to the other point with radio news is that it needs to be the most easily digestible form of news that you can get. If you think about your own radio listening habits, you're always doing something else. You're making kids' school lunches, you're driving the car, you're washing the dishes at night, if you're reading a book, radio is on in the background, you've got to be able to absorb it without concentrating. So radio news has to be written in a very simple, very easy to understand manner. Yes, with streaming now you can rewind radio, but typically you can't if you're just listening to it. So you have to be able to get the message first time. So in other words, if you're talking to a radio journalist, don't use technical language, don't use jargon, use the most simple form of the facts. The good thing about radio for you guys is that they're happy to do phone interviews. So if they call you, you don't have to be somewhere in particular, you can just do an interview over the phone as long as you've got a pretty reasonable landline. Scratchy mobile phones are useless because they might do the interview and they'll walk away and say, can't use it, it's not broadcast quality. So, easy to do interviews for them, and they want to speak to you now. For scientists, often your stories won't be as time critical as some others will be, so they might be happy to leave you an hour or so, but essentially if they call you, they want you as soon as possible. Radio current affairs, as I said, very similar to radio news, except they have slightly longer deadlines, typically maybe filing for 3 programs a day rather than filing for the hour. However, their stories are longer, they're more detailed, and they involve more people, so again, they are working to an intense deadline. Radio programs is what we listen to when we listen to the radio, are probably a great area for a lot of you to think about, because radio programs love science. They like anything that they can talk about that's interesting, that might be different, quirky or topical, and they can get you on and have a conversation. They differ to news in the sense that it's conversation, but they're also time critical. For radio programs, they'll give you a call and they might give you an hour or so or 3 hours, but once they've locked you in, you've got to stick to that time because they go live, and if you're not at the end of the phone, they're stuffed. And I know that because just before starting here on one of my last shifts producing at the local ABC here, I'd lined up the new head of Queensland AMA, who was crucial to the 10-minute slot that we had locked in. And I called him a minute and a half beforehand to establish we had a good connection and make sure he was there, ready to go live, and his phone number was engaged. So I kept pressing redial, 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 while typing on the screen, shit, this guy's not here, what are we going to do? Then called the person he was travelling with, who said, no, he hasn't turned up, don't know where he is. Phone number's still engaged. Called the media person. In the end, as my presenter was introducing the piece, I scrabbled around and got someone who could throw some light on the issue. It was hardly what we were hoping for. 15 minutes later, the guy called back and said, oh, sorry about that. My car broke down and I was on hold to the RACQ, so I thought I'd just wait till I'd spoken to them. Do you want to do this now? I went, yeah, that would be great. 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, would have been fabulous, but thanks for the call and letting me know your car had broken down. And we've moved on. There is no chance to backtrack. So some radio programs will do a pre-record if they really want you and you're not available at all when they need you, but essentially this ruins the flow of the program, so most of the time they prefer to have you on live. So, as I said, they're great for you because they love interesting science and they want to talk to you in a simple manner. So moving on from radio, this is just the quick and dirty of them. So if I'm boring you,
on that one. Don't they also prefer you to pre-record so that they can cut and paste?
No. For radio programs, if they're trying to get something that they need to fit a slot, they will do that. But essentially, they want you live. It's for the presenters as well. Presenters rely on adrenaline. They also like to allow an interview to flow, and the talent, if they know that something is not live, they can often stumble and fumble, and it can really ruin a nice flow to a program if it's pre-recorded. It also means that if you get any talkback calls or anybody else calling in, you can't break into the segment. It's locked in. You're stuck with 10 minutes. So there will be times when they will want to do that, but essentially for a radio program, they'd be happier to have you live. Anyone else? As I said, if anyone's getting bored and wants me to hurry up, I can skip through, just press a button a few times and move on. If not, we'll march on into TV land, which is a completely different kettle of fish. TV is sort of the glam kids of news, and it's all about pictures. You can have the greatest science story in the world, and if you have no pictures, you'll reduce it to 2 lines read by a bored-looking newsreader who doesn't understand what he is talking about. So, TV is picture-driven. Without images, you don't have a story. As I said, you just need that visual angle to it. TV now works to tight and multiple deadlines. Once upon a time, TV had deadline at the end of the day, and you kind of worked, but it was a bit of fun, and you got your story pattern out. There wasn't a problem. Now we have rolling news networks, we have multiple bulletins, so TV reporters are pretty much working as fast as they can. They're not doing it as tough as radio reporters are, but they're working a lot harder than they used to once upon a time. The different thing to radio again is they don't want you on the end of the phone. If they are desperate and you are the lead story and you are somewhere absolutely unreachable, they will have you on the end of the phone. But what they want most of all is to pop you in front of the camera. So with TV, the worst thing you can do is to put out a great story and then take off on a field trip and spend the next 3 weeks underwater. Because if they can't put you in front of the camera, they've lost it. They're not going to run it. And again, I can't stress enough pictures. When you're thinking about the work that you're doing, you're thinking about what you might want to do with it media-wise at the end, be thinking pictures. And I know there's such a long lead time for so much of what you do, but if you can be thinking about getting images, getting a video that you can shoot, anything that you can provide to them at the end, or say with Jodie's story recently about the epaulette sharks, she'd mentioned that there were the baby sharks over at Marfu. It's fantastic. Who doesn't love a baby shark on TV? Thankfully, they were the right kind of baby shark, although there would be some networks who really wouldn't care too much about that. So if you can have the pictures, that's crucial. TV news stories, as you probably noticed, they're not particularly detailed, and what reporters want from you are simple grabs. 10 seconds worth of you explaining in fairly simple language what is obviously a very complex issue. TV is considered probably one of the most dumbed-down forms of news that you're going to see, mainly because it is the words and pictures. I keep repeating this, it's picture-driven, it's image-driven. A story that has great pictures will be a good TV story. A story that's got rubbish pictures will be useless. You'll find that a TV story will start with the best pictures they've got, not necessarily the best words or best content. A bad TV story will start with great words and rubbish pictures. So again, I keep saying it, it all comes back to vision. TV current affairs, it's a slightly fluffier beast than TV news. Most TV current affairs have a few more days to play with in getting their stories together, although some programs do have a one-day turnaround, and you'll find that those people will be very unpleasant to deal with because A, they're not used to tight deadlines, and B, they've got a lot of pressure to get a big program together in one day. The downside of having a little bit of extra time is that they will use all of the time that you have and more. Their interviews won't be quick, they'll be long, they'll be a lot longer than you would expect. John, your cut-down interview went to 20 minutes, but I think was your Four Corners interview an hour? Yeah. And that was to be used a few grabs in a story. The vision that they will want to get, they will put you through paces over and over and over again as they film you from this angle and that angle, and your hands doing this and your hands doing that, and you walking into the room and you walking into the room again and again and again as they get, you get the picture. It takes a lot of time. So that's pretty much TV. And then we move on to my least favourite. I can say that because I'm a broadcast. I don't like print journalists. think they're all pretty good. They tend to have pretty average personal hygiene, and they're busy. They break stories. They have scoops. There's that mentality. Anyway, when it comes to print, these guys can be good friends because you can do interviews over the phone, you can do them via email. You don't have to be in front of a camera anywhere, and generally the deadlines aren't quite as ferocious as they are for radio or for TV. They, as I said, they still work in this world where they have the idea that they have exclusivity and they have scoops, which is kind of ridiculous when you think that their paper comes out in the morning and then in the meantime you have every single story that comes online, and they get scooped and stories that float around them all the time. But they still have the egos to match. Ever get the impression that I don't hold them in high esteem? They're great, really nice people. I've worked with some nice friendly groups. They do, as I said, consider themselves to be incredibly busy and important, and so when you deal with them, they will always give you the impression that they are terribly busy and important, and their time is precious, so don't waste their time. But again, they want you, so remember, when they give you that attitude, give it straight back to them. The one thing I really like about what's happening to print journalists is the rise of online. Now, online is changing everything for everyone in the media world. Online is doing something to print that was never going to happen before. It's increased their... Where have we gone? It's increased their deadlines. I don't know if that one's supposed to be next. I can leave it up. Print journals are now actually putting their stories online, although they're not filing as quickly as they would if they were purely online. They're also facing competition from every other media source around. So once upon a time, broadcast didn't compete with print. Now, broadcast all have websites. They'll get their stories up straight away. As I said, the ABC has gone from bi-media to multi-platform, which means that their stories come out on TV and on radio throughout the day, and they also have to come out online. There's big wars in the media, which is very interesting and entertaining if you're interested in the media, as to what licenses people are allowed to have and where they're allowed to publish and broadcast and all those sorts of things. But essentially online is just changing the way people work. So it's increased their deadlines, it's increased the competition that the print world faces, and it's also pushing them into an area that they hadn't been so comfortable with in the past, which is incorporating things like video and audio into websites. So you'll find a lot of print journalists will now be learning how to pick up cameras and go and shooting interviews and things like that. So, as I said, online and social media, it's changing. Its impact is not only on the way print works, but it's impacting on everyone pretty much. It's redefining the traditional media landscape. And one of the big issues is that people now increasingly get information from the web, and they don't necessarily go to news sources to get it. So this is pushing news organisations to try and be, sooner, faster, bigger, brighter, better. It's having an interesting impact, I'd say, on a lot of journalists as well, because people are working really very hard, even the print journalists. So online, as I said, we've got purely online papers around, like The Guardian. You know that The Guardian is great if you want to get a story out, because it's highly regarded, and the story goes out as quickly as the journalist can write it. And the other day, I think he churned one out in half an hour, and it was a good story, and it was well done, and it was on the wire, and people started picking it up, and then we got interest from that. So online is a really, really good source for you guys to deal with and to talk to. Social media, it's good fun. Who here is involved in social media? Who here is going to increase their engagement with social media or start their engagement with social media? Look, when I first came to this job, I thought, that's all right, I can do this. I can tweet and I can do the engagement with social media. But somebody pointed out to me, I'm then engaging with your community. I'm seeing what everybody is talking about, what they're saying, what they're reading, what they're thinking. And that's great. But you guys should be doing it as well, because that's a way for you to engage with your community. And as it says, social media, it bypasses traditional media altogether. So it is your way of getting your message out, your story out, without having to go through that third party. You don't need a journalist interpreting what you're trying to get out. You can do it yourself. And you can pretty much control who you're aiming it to by who you follow, who you encourage to follow you. So, and as your target audiences, I guess, would be a scientific community, interest groups, prospective students, general public, this is your way of targeting them. So it's just it is just a fantastic opportunity for all of you, and I hope everyone will really start to push the social media aspect. So, there we go, quick and dirty on the different forms of media that are out there. What is it that the media want? And funnily enough, first and foremost, media outlets want news. Who would have thought, okay? News. They want news. Which means that whatever you're putting up to them has to have news value. It has to have a news hook, it has to have a news angle. It's got to have public appeal, it's got to be interesting, and you have to be able to explain why we care about it. It's that relatability that a lot of people talk about. People are inherently self-interested. If you can tell them why this affects them, why it affects something that they love or someone that they love, then they're going to be interested. They also like superlatives, you know, the biggest, the fastest, the first, the greatest, the newest, anything you can sort of throw in a story, they'd love. Any sort of conflict or controversy, it's always good, gets lapped up. But essentially it's the impact on people. And more and more news organisations are being driven by public opinion. Like it or not, and I don't, it's happening. As one journalist told me recently, she's been told to tone it down on the, quote, worthy stories and go for those with more clickability. In other words, stories that when they go online, people go, let's click through to that. Everyone here know about clickbait? Things that kind of grab you want to click and read, not because it's particularly worthy, but because, hey, that sounds kind of cool. That's what is pushing a lot of the media at the moment. As I said, I don't like it. Most journalists don't like it, but it's happening. So, as I said, we want news. They want news. I'm you, we, not them, we. So they want news. And if you're sort of questioning, you know, the concept of news, the thing that I was brought up as a journalist to know was the simple phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. That's what I taught all my students. You can have the most worthy work in the world, and then you have something that bleeds and bang, it's your front page, it's your lead story, it's everywhere. So, you know, the news isn't fair, but then I guess life in many ways is not fair. So, here we go. We've made it through all of this. You have a story which has clickability, it has appeal, it has a news angle. How is it that you then deal with the media? So the most important thing to remember, and this might seem kind of strange, is that actually when it comes to the media, you're in control, you're in charge. You are the expert. You have the message, they want it. If you're ever finding yourself in an interview situation where you feel nervous or uncomfortable or anything like that, look at the reporter. 9 times out of 10, they don't know about this issue. Or if they do, they certainly know nowhere near as much as you do. You're the expert, they're not. And as a result of that, you should be the ones controlling the message. So when you have a story to go out, sit down, think about it clearly, define what your key messages are, and stick to them. Somebody can ask you, Amelia the other day faced a lot of questioning about dredging. She had a story about the impact of sedimentation. Everyone, of course, wanted to talk about dredging and policy on the Great Barrier Reef. She had a message and she brought it back to that every time. And it was fantastic. It was really well done. You work out what your message is. You don't have to engage with what they want you to engage with. You just make it very clear. As I said, you're in control. So you've got your message, you're going to stick to it. The next thing is make yourself available. Again, it is pointless us putting out a release or trying to get attention from the media and then turning around and going, yeah, he's off a dive boat somewhere for the next 3 weeks and typically he will be underwater most of the day. And I had that. Luckily, we planned in advance and been able to do some pre-interviews, but it makes it very hard for the media if they have a good story that they actually do want to run for you and you're not available. So make yourself available, end of a phone line, on email, or in person if you can. When you're talking to the media, use simple words. Little words, simple words. Because essentially, if the journalist doesn't get what you're talking about, they're not going to be able to explain to their news editor why this is a good story. If they can't do that, the story's not going to be picked up and run. The other thing is if they're not understanding clearly what you're saying, your story is going to be misinterpreted or lost. So you want to use simple, clear language, explaining, complex explanations will be lost on your audience. Think about it, you're talking to your great aunt or your neighbour, someone who knows nothing about science. Think of how you can express yourself in a way that they're going to understand. So, and the other thing, of course, is the media wants to speak to you now. And I've managed to get sidetracked by trying to talk about that and lose my face. Yeah. So, what do we do to take advantage of the media and their interest in the work that you guys do? Well, the traditional media, through the media release, is one way of doing it. The other, of course, is through social media. So we'll start with the good old media release. Now, I'm starting to get the impression that people seem to have a slightly odd idea of what the media release is supposed to do. I think a lot of people think it kind of comes at the end, it's the full stop. Whereas, in fact, the media release is actually the start of getting the story out. So all the time it might take to bring a media release together is irrelevant. This is selling your story. So what you need your media release to do is to be news. A lot of organisations will be slack and they will pick it up and they'll run it whole bolus as is, chuck some reporter's byline on it, and it'll go out. Some good journalists will give you a call, they'll read the paper, they'll interview you, they'll actually work out what the story is, and they'll do it. But essentially we need to make sure that if you have a media release, it must be news, and that you must be available to talk about it. Again, it's that availability. You start with, of course, your strongest news angle, because that way you're hooking your audience, in this case journalists. If you can sell the story to them in the first or second line, then you stand a chance. If you bury the lead in about the fourth or fifth paragraph, it's in the bin or the recycling, depending on how green they are. You've got to make it easy to understand, and you need to put quotes in, and when you do that, make sure they're quotes that you're happy to see in print. I think there is sometimes people don't feel very happy with what they say, oh, yeah, that's fine there, but I don't really want them saying that. Anything that goes on a media release, you have to be happy with seeing it printed. It's like when you talk to a journalist. Never expect that a journalist will take stuff off the record. Always think that anything you say can be used, and so make sure you never say anything that you wouldn't be happy to see in print somewhere. So that's the traditional method of the media release. And believe it or not, the media release is not just thrown out willy-nilly into the ether to disappear. There is actually an art to placing stories. And I know that's a strange thing, but you feed a media release into the 24-hour news cycle. Now, for all of the changes in the media, it still essentially, on a domestic level, follows a 24-hour news cycle. You start off with stories get broken still in morning papers, mainly because they get fed to the morning papers. They typically get picked up by the early radio news bulletins, and if you get a story into one of the morning radio news current affairs programs, it's almost a guarantee that it will flow on through the day. So that's your feeding in point. If you can give your media release or your news story into that first line the day before, you kick off your news cycle. Then throughout the day, other news organisations, online news outlets will pick it up and they'll run with it. You'll get your responses, your reactions throughout the day, and then by evening, the TV news and current affairs programs will wrap it all up together, and you'll have got across the whole 24-hour cycle. Now, a lot of the stories that we'll do won't have quite that level of, ability to continue to generate news through the day, but you certainly don't want to miss getting it into the morning and then get that TV wrap up at the end of the day. So there is actually a little bit of an art to it. It's not just chuck it out and hope that someone somewhere does it. It's a little bit different for getting things into the international media. Given different time zones, different interests of organisations, the best way to get things into international media is to get it picked up by one of the international wire services. The recent the Academy of Science story this week got picked up by AFP, Agence France Presse, and went gangbusters overseas. Because once it gets into one of these wire services, it's used and accessed by news organisations around the world. So that story, once it's picked up here, goes everywhere. That's the great thing about it. The difficult or the bad thing is that you have everyone in the world trying to get their stories into these few outlets. So you're not competing with local stories for a local audience, you're competing with pretty much every story in the world to try and get that level of pickup. So If you have a good story with an international angle to it, yep, we'll try our hardest to get it out that way. If you've got a great story, but it's a locally based story, be happy with the local pickup, local coverage, because these guys aren't going to be interested in something that is just a very basic local story. So that's how we feed it all in. What happens next? Social media. This is the other side. Now, social media, I think, is a fabulous way of actually getting what you want out. Now, some people sort of think that things have to be picked up by a press release for it to, I guess, to be deemed important. But even if something doesn't have a release put out, we can still promote it by social media. And this is the great way to reach a very large audience very quickly. And you're not having to worry about whether it's a domestic audience or whether it's an international audience. You can reach out. Was it one of the tweets that went out on Amelia's work got picked up by GetUp, which has 98,000 followers? Now, they retweeted it. It's not to say that 98,000 people saw it, but there is that audience potential out there, and then it gets picked up and things follow and follow and follow. So some of the great benefits of using social media is that you actually get to bypass the traditional media. You don't have to try and convince a journalist as to why this is a good story. You can just tell the world that it's a good story. You have that capacity to reach that huge international audience. You can also target your audience a little bit better. If you are engaged with following a lot of scientific organisations, scientists, like-minded people, they're following you, you're getting your information across to them. You get to control your message. Again, you don't have a reporter getting in the way. And then it does roll around to the fact that if something does go gangbusters on social media, you can grab the attention of the mainstream media, even though you haven't aimed at them to start off with. Now, the centre has a Twitter account, and it is a very hungry beast that needs feeding. So what I'm after really is I want recently published papers, and I'm going to say I need them. Any awards, talks or seminars, any great photos, any videos, anything that's coming up that you can tell me about, give me a heads up, we can put it out. And then I can also work with you when you're tweeting, we can retweet, all those sorts of things. What I need you to be doing is to mention us. So everyone who's on Twitter knows what I'm talking about. Everyone else, just remember, mention the centre and hashtag JCU, because we've got a little deal that we've taken over, hashtag JCU for here. It used to belong to a university in the States, but now we've got it through sheer force of numbers, and that gives us another way of getting stuff out. So we need all of these things, and if you can give them to me, I can be promoting stuff that way all the time. It doesn't require the immediate release there. And we're actually starting to work out what it is that social media likes. Funnily enough, you see there are a few little spikes every now and again. That's typically when we've had something, a media release or something that we've put out, you get that spike. But we're getting about 1.3 thousand impressions per day, which for a lot of people might not seem much, but when I first started, I think we were getting about 200 impressions a day. So people want videos that they can watch. They want to be able to have papers or things that they can click through and read, anything that they can engage with. So, pithy little line I thought was probably the way to go, but it gets a little bit of attention. What people want to do is to be able to click through and see. And I also like that because I'm new to PowerPoint, so I thought it looked really cool. You're lucky you don't have lots of things shooting across the screen. I just ran out of time because it was going to be a bit like that at one stage. So, as I said, we're working out what does work. So if you have any of these things, please send them my way and we can use them.
Sorry, Eleanor, what's an impression?
Impression, okay, now, impressions are people who are actually seeing it and being involved. You can send out a tweet, you might have 500 followers, but it doesn't mean that 500 people have actually seen it. The impressions are supposed to give you a more realistic idea of actually how many people have paid attention. I have no idea how they work that out. So they have impressions, you see, we've got engagements. So if people actually click through and they watch the video or they click through to the paper or do something with it, then they've actually engaged with it. So engagements is what we look for as well. That means that rather than just tweeting retweeting, which is great. We want that to happen. It means that people are actually going through and looking at stuff. The newer they are, the lower the numbers will be. I ignore the engagement rate because I just don't like that number. It's something you can do if you don't come from a scientific background. You can just ignore numbers that you don't like. You'll find that a lot of people might be clicking through, they might be watching, they might be reading, and they'll be tweeting on. So your engagement rate will look fairly low because your tweet's being hammered around the place, but you're still getting a lot of people actually looking at it. So I like engagement and I like impressions. I like to try to make sure our impressions hit a certain point each day. It's a basic minimum.
Eleanor, what's your thought on timing? Not just with social media, but also with press releases, and something that we've chatted about. Yeah,
timing with social media, timing is really important because we are a small population, and our time frame isn't working necessarily with the rest of the world. So there are those windows, and Jodie, you explained it really well. The windows where early in the morning where you can still get the US market. We're more in line with the European market, but the US market is really probably the biggest and the most active. So if you're tweeting your very best stuff at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're throwing it away. It's gone. 500 people, if they happen to be looking at Twitter at that moment in time, will see it. But you're not going to get that really big pickup. And when people in the US wake up, it's long gone. So the downside of something like Twitter, of course, is unless it does get picked up, its lifespan is very short. So the lifespan of an average tweet is about 30 seconds unless it gets passed around. And once it does, and you'll find that there'll be something that you tweeted 2 weeks ago that someone somewhere has been trawling through a site they've found and they've flipped it back into life. And if they've done it with a lot of followers, then it can build again. Facebook is another area that I'm looking into for the centre. Again, it'll need the same kind of feed-in. Not sure whether we're going to go that way at this stage, but if this works effectively, and if we can use the same sort of information on a Facebook page, not a Facebook site, just a page, then I think that would be a good thing to do as well. But at the moment, Twitter is our social media. Timing for general press releases is quite important. You can never predict when something else is going to blow you out of the water completely. That's just a hit and miss. But there are absolute dead zones. Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock. When it's financial reporting season, you'll always hear a throwaway story on the radio of somebody announcing massive losses or something like that, because they can guarantee that it'll have the lowest pickup of the week. So if you want to get something out but don't want anyone to know that it exists, Friday afternoon's your time. If you want to get the media to come to something that you're doing, you've got to remember that they are filing for deadlines, so early mid-morning is when you want to be asking people to come around, because that gives them time to start filing and feeding stuff in. If you want to be completely ignored by the media, go for the afternoon. It's just your newspapers have given up and gone home. Your TV editors are now editing and finishing cut stories, and radio, well, they're just too busy and they don't care. And they won't be unlikely to come out anyway. So there are also particular times in the week that you don't want to try and put a release out. You've got to be aware of big things that are going on. If it's like the problem with World Parks is coming directly after G20, and so there may be a little bit of politician fatigue. It's been suggested that people might be feeling a bit as though they've had enough of people talking about issues, or it might actually work really well because it's different enough. So if there are big major events happening, the idea of putting something out at that time is potentially killing it. Some stories, because you will have a paper that it'll be released under embargo, your publisher will put out a release as well, your co-authors around the world will put out stuff. That means that we're then tied into that. If it's something that you get to choose the timing of more because it's your paper, people are here, you can decide whether a release goes out or not, or when, then you can probably time it better to fit in with, I guess, issues of the day that might be more related to it. So timing is an issue, and still every now and again playing with that and tweaking that. But with Twitter, just think about the time zones that you're tweeting into. You can program your tweets to go out at various times. You can use things like Hootsuite or Sprout Social and organise for them to go out at particular times. I think there's another one you can use which it basically generates a time limit where it'll flick stuff out, where it thinks it'll receive its greatest audience. So there are ways around it occasionally. So I'll quickly go through the process of how we go about actually doing this here. Twitter, obviously just email me. Drop in, have a chat, email me, send me the information, send me the paper, a photo, if it's really technical, an explanation in plain English can help, because it would be nice finding what I was tweeting. To get a media release done, the more notice the better. So if you've got something that's going to be accepted or has been accepted, then we can start working on something. But firstly, you've got to look at the idea of, is it a story? So is it something that is worthy science, or is it something that's worthy science and it is actually a news story? So if it's a good story, then it's got its news angle or a hook. Please certainly send me the paper, give me the details about where it's been published and when you expect that to happen. Student work has to go through their supervisors, because we're not pretty keen on throwing students to the wolves. I mean, putting them in front of the media, simply because it can be quite a difficult situation first up when you're in that situation where you might be pushed into areas that you don't want to go in. So student work, go through your supervisor. If your supervisor thinks it's something that needs a media release, they'll contact me. I'm certainly not the final say. I then have to take that through and get approval to see whether it's something that we will do or not. If it is, if we get the go-ahead, there are two ways we can go about doing a media release. There's the draft that you do, or the interview process that you do with me. I have typically been doing an interview process where you send me the paper, then we sit down and I do an interview, and then from the paper and the interview try and come up with something. Although I've found a couple of people have sent me a draft, and the real benefit of that is on paper you are much better at telling me what you think is important. So when you've written it down, I think it's because you're quite good at writing, you're really good at making sure you point out to me what is important. I'm not trying to work through what's important from a conversation in a paper. I've found that it just simply streamlines the process. I'm happy to work either way with whatever suits people. So I'm happy to do each, or happy to do both. But as I said, I've just found that when you write, it doesn't necessarily come across as a press release or a news story, but you certainly make sure you've got the points that you think are important in. And it means that the first level of journalist being me doesn't miss them. And the other thing is make sure you're available, as I keep stressing. We can't always guarantee that, but if you know that you're going to be away when something's coming out and we're within the embargo time frame where we can do it, we can do pre-interviews. So, I'm sorry I've taken as long as I have. I wasn't going to. I was going to wrap up nicely and say, now I've told you all about this stuff and let's have questions. But I think people are starting to yawn. So if anyone has any questions, please throw them my way. Otherwise, thank you to Cindy, because I've never touched PowerPoint voluntarily before.
It's evident that you're getting some sort of metrics from Twitter.
Yeah.
Can you get metrics from other
You
sources?
can, actually. Most of the social media now have their own metrics that they have. So Twitter has theirs, Facebook will do them, Google Plus has extensive, you can get a rundown on pretty much everything. So the analytics for that is great. So most organisations now, most outlets now are doing it, so that you can go and pay for another package which will go through and do it for you. But I think they're realising that everyone cares about what their numbers are like. So yeah, so Facebook has them, Twitter has them, Google Plus has them, LinkedIn I think also has it as well. But I'm not such a LinkedIn fan, so I haven't looked so deeply into that one. But yeah, you can get all of them can do the numbers for you. And I do apologise for going so long. It was only a 27-minute talk.
Any other questions?
Just a comment. You mentioned the wire services are usually our mechanism for going global. Something else we do fairly routinely is if the paper's co-authored by a non-Australian author, we find that if they have a press release from their institution in the States or wherever, that you get a sort of two-pronged attack. Usually we do that for a science or nature paper, and then you get guaranteed international coverage.
And that's since I've been here, we've done I think a couple where that's been the case, and it does. It really helps that boost. The other thing that I forgot to mention was the services like Reef Alert. I've discovered the website news organisations just seem to rip it off, Reef Alert. So if anything goes onto that site, it'll then roll out. I think we've got massive coverage in South America on one of the Nemo branded stories because they just ripped it off. Whole smallest ran it. And again, it's also helped to have really good photos that can accompany a press release, because a photo will give you a much greater chance of getting it onto websites because it looks really nice.
And presumably you have a whole list of journalists that you target
a list
directly.
of friendly journalists, and then the big rollout. So the other day with the Academy of Science thing is an example where the friendly journalists were targeted on Monday, and then the press release went out embargoed until midnight, so they had access to the talent to interview, they had the press release, they had the submission, and that way you can sort of control a little bit of how it goes out, and if you pick and choose carefully, you'll get people who everyone else will follow. Because a mass rollout of a press release, it turns up in a newsroom, and if someone happens to be looking at that moment to go, oh, that looks interesting, then it might get picked up. Otherwise, it just joins the pile of emails that get deleted when your account's too full.
So should we be accumulating videos
Yes.
to go with them?
Yeah, that would be, look, if anyone can be getting any video, whether or not it gets used in the end for your particular story, that would be fantastic. Because we don't have video to put out, or not, we certainly don't have much. And when organisations come to us and say, do you have any pictures? We say, yep, we can give you great pictures. What about video? Yeah, not really. So if, as I said, if you're doing a project now and you think this could be a good TV story down the track, if you can start with a GoPro, I think most people have GoPros. When you go on field trips, just start gathering vision. People don't mind so much now about the quality, but 5-10 years ago, no one would touch anything that was shot by someone who wasn't actually sitting there with this big Sony on their shoulder. But now they're happy to take pretty much anything. Yep.
Have there been any more discussions about like the photo bank for the centre, or Creative Commons licenses, or copyright issues, or made any headway with that?
That's still a work in progress at the moment. So if anyone knows that they have photos in our system at the moment, I would love it if you could just let me know which ones they are and what uses they have. We have some amazing photos which I'm unable to use because I can't either work out who took them, what credits they want, what purposes they can be used for. And it's as frustrating as anything when you go through it. This stuff is amazing, but I can't put it out. Again,
I think you can be pretty confident that if you've got it, someone gave it to us.
you're all but given under specific use purposes only. I fell into that trap in my second week and got a bit of a bollocking. And when you do send photos, please let me know what you want as a credit and what purposes it can be used for. Because if I know what the credit is and when I can use it, then it's great. But yeah, the photos are a work in progress.
Isn't there a huge photo bank from ICRS with all the names of?
And that's a it's a readily identifiable source. So over the years, we've accumulated pretty pictures that people have mostly given us for the annual reports, and we've used some of them as well.
And some people, when they give them, are happy for them to be reused, but some people are also not happy for them to be reused. Some want them to be used only for, say, for an annual report. They don't want them to be sent out where they can be ripped off from, say, if you tweeted a high quality photo, someone can just rip it off. There's someone's photo gone. So photos are a bit of an issue. So if you have stuff that you know is in the system that you can clearly identify and let me know, that would be fantastic. If there's stuff that you don't want used, delete it, take it out of the general pool, because then it won't accidentally be used.
And the photos are available if you want to have a look. You just need to contact us, and you can have a look through what we've got.
So are you talking here about the Flickr one? The Flickr database as well? The Flickr...
We've got Flickr, and then there are so many other photos which are in various different folders. So if you know that you've provided photos, we can sit down and go through and point them out pretty quickly.
So they're all in Lightroom now?
They're getting there.
So? Yeah. But if you give photographs, can you let us know, what their availability is? Okay, so the ICRS ones, for instance, are only available for promotion of the centre. So when JCU accessed them, there was a hullabaloo because they used them in publicity for a particular project they were doing, and they should not have done that. They didn't contact us about it. So we want to know, if you provide us with photographs, what your limitations are in using those photographs, okay? And they'll get recorded.
You can put that in the file, can't you? You can put a caption in electronically.
You can put it in the metadata.
Any other questions, or we might wrap up there? It's about 5 o'clock. Once again, I don't know, that was really useful.
Jodie was tweeting.
I was
Twice at the beginning. And this isn't even a good time to tweet.